Hello, React Summit. I'm Matt Landers, Head of Developer Relations at WPEngine. And in this session, we're going to talk about API first development with Headless WordPress. So our agenda is really simple. I'm going to do some talky talk. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what we're going to do, and then we're going to do a demo. We only have 20 minutes, so I don't want to spend too much time on the talking. I want to show you how to actually do API first development with WordPress. So you may be thinking, why WordPress? There's a lot of different options out there for you to do API development. Why would I use WordPress? Well, one really good reason is that 40% of the web is WordPress, and that is growing. And what that means is that your users probably already know WordPress. So they'll be comfortable in the admin panel, like your content producers and marketers will know how to get around WordPress, which is a benefit to you that they already know the software. It's also free and open source, so why not take advantage of that? And there's a lot of extensions already built into WordPress that make it really great for headless. And headless WordPress is awesome, so you don't need to know PHP. I think that's some people's fear is like, I don't want to do PHP, so I'm not going to do WordPress, especially at an event like this where everyone's a React developer. Well, you'll be happy to know I don't know PHP, and I do Headless WordPress almost every day. I'm a TypeScript, JavaScript developer, and I spend my time in Node, TypeScript, Dino, those type of places. I don't do PHP. You don't have to either. All right, for this session, there's a few resources that are available to you. The code that I'm going to be using and deploying in this session can be found on my GitHub at matt-lander/followa.dev, that repository. The framework that we're going to be using for Headless WordPress is from WPEngine. So if you go to the WPEngine GitHub, you'll see a headless-framework open source project. That is what we're going to use to kick off our project and get it going. You can also go to developers.wpengine.com and get a ton of resources from me and my team on Headless WordPress and how to do specific things. All right, let's dive right in and do API development with WordPress. All right, for this demo, we're going to build a site that lists out different developers on Twitter that we can go follow. And we want to be able to find developers based on the language that they typically use, because if I'm a developer and I want to follow another developer, I'm probably looking for somebody that works in the language and frameworks or technologies that I know so that I can get more information and learn more about it. So that's what we're going to build on the site. And we're going to use Headless WordPress to be the platform that we use for our API, and also where our users will be able to go in and enter in the data for the website. All right, so what I've done is I've used local to spin up a WordPress site on my local machine. You can get this at localwp.com. It's really great for quickly spinning up sites in WordPress and working on them locally. Then you can push them up somewhere live. All right, so I've already got this running, and I also have some plugins that I always use already installed. The number one plugin that I always use is WPGraphQL. You got to have that because you need a nice API whenever you're going to work with WordPress. There is a REST API already, but I find it much easier to use the GraphQL API, especially since there are so many relationships in our data. There's also two other plugins that really turn WordPress into an API building platform, and that would be the custom post type UI and advanced custom fields. There's also extensions for those two for WPGraphQL that I have installed as well. And I have the Headless framework from WPEngine installed as well, which is a plugin. All right, let's look at what that gives us first. So if we go to the GraphQL playground here, we'll see that we can make GraphQL calls straight into our data and get content out. So by default, WordPress has posts and pages. And this content comes out as raw HTML, as we can see here. On the front end and from an API, that's not really what I want to get all the time. For instance, in this case, I want to get a list of developers and some structured data about them. I want to build an API that's going to give me the data back on the front end that looks the way that I want it to look. So let's do that. The first thing that we're going to do is create that custom content type, which in WordPress is called a custom post type. And we're going to call it developers. And our plural label will be developers and developer. We'll see why we need that in just a second. We'll scroll down and we're going to get rid of some of the default things that show up on this post. We only want the title, and we want this to show up in GraphQL. So I got to tell it how I want it to show up in GraphQL. I'm going to add that post type. As soon as I add that, you'll notice that there's a developer section in our menu now, which is cool. So now I have a way that I can go and see the developers that I've entered. Now I've had some from previously and they show back up, so I don't want to have to enter those in again. But if I click one, I can only see the name. This isn't very useful, right? So now we can go over to our graphical editor and we could pull these out. Oh, we could say developers and just grab the title. And we can get that data out now. So we have the title, but we need more data than this. We need to pull out, we want their GitHub, their Twitter handle, all of those things. So let's go ahead and add those. So we go to custom fields and we say developer fields. You can name that whatever you want. And then I only want these to show up on that developer custom post type. I don't want it to show up on my blog posts or my pages. I only want them to show up on my developer custom post type. And then we can just add fields really simply. So I'm gonna add a name and I want that to show up in GraphQL. So I make sure I have that checked here. I also want to add Twitter. So I want their Twitter handle. That's just going to be text as well. And I also want to know what languages they work in. So languages, and we'll do a taxonomy. So in WordPress, the taxonomy are things like tags or categories. And for this, we're going to use tags to do this. We also want to get their personal blog. This will be a URL. We'll see how that comes into play in a minute. And we want their GitHub. Be another URL. And that should be good. All right, so we're going to go down at the bottom here. And we want to make sure this shows up in GraphQL again. And I usually prefix the field group name with ACF and then like developer, whatever I want to call it. All right, we go back to the top and we will publish this. Now let's go over to our, go back to our editor. And now look, we have all of these fields and a nice editor for someone to come edit. So I could come in here and say, well, I know that Will also knows C#, so I'll add a new tag here and call that. He doesn't have a blog, and then we're good. We can update that. So now I have a nice editor. I can go add a new developer and add all that in. And then we want, now what I'm going to get is a nice API, right? So if I go to my graphical IDE, I can now pull all of these out, name, and we can scroll down over here and as well. And we'll see that they're going to show up in that ACF developer group. We have their GitHub, name, personal blog, Twitter, what languages they have. So let's run this. All right, pretty cool. So now we're pulling all of that data out in a nice structured way. We're not getting raw content like we did with the post. We're getting real content like we would expect from an API, right? We can even rename this. So we'll just give it an alias, call it data instead of ACF. Now we got something nice that we can use in our website. So the next step is to go build the website. So let's go do that. For the site, we're going to use the Headless framework from WP Engine. It's an open source project that makes connecting to WordPress and pulling down content really easy. So we're going to go ahead and use that. So if we go to the project in GitHub and we scroll down, there's an npx command that you can run that will go ahead and get that project set up for you. I've already run that in the interest of time and I've got it set up. So let's look at what it is right now. I pulled out a lot of the boilerplate that's in there. So there's this whole site there for you that shows posts and is a blog. Pull that out and put in some of my own CSS and some components. So this is what the site looks like right now. We have this cool light dark mode, which you did purely with CSS variables. Definitely check out the code if you think that's cool. And then let's get into the code and see what we're going to do here. All right, so we have this environment variables file where we tell the framework where our WordPress instance is. So this is just looking at our local instance right now. We'll change that when we deploy it live to a live instance. And then we have our Headless WordPress secret, which that comes out of WordPress itself. So if I come back over here, I go to settings, you can see this secret is in here. You can't hack me, this is local. You won't be able to see the real one, but you can try. All right, so we got that set up. And that means that the framework is ready. It knows how to talk to WordPress. We just have to use the functionality from the framework to make those calls. So let's do it. All right, the first thing that we want to do is to get GQL from Apollo. And we're going to use this to save our query. So we'll say get all devs. And we're going to grab that from here that we did earlier and just paste it in. All right, so now we have our query, which is great. Now we need to make the query and provide that to the home page. So let's determine what the home page is going to need from a type standpoint. So we'll create an interface, home props, and it's going to have a developers. We need to pass in developers, and it'll be the developers type, which I've already defined, and I can show you that. Right here, I have this type. This looks just like what we're going to get back from the query. So if you go over here, it's these same fields just typed out in TypeScript, and then I have the array. And since it's under that data property, like we have right here, we have it extended like that for the developers. All right, cool. So that's what we're going to pass in here. So let's give this a type, react.fc. And we'll pass in home props. And now we'll have those developers ready for us. Great. So let's go ahead and map this out. So developers.map. And we'll put those in a card component. I already have this component created. I'll show that in just a second. We need a key, which is going to be developer.data.twitter, because that should be unique. And then the card just expects those developer props. So we're going to do developer.data. And let's take a look at that component real quick. We'll import that. And it's just a pure component that just has some styling and stuff like that for us. So we don't have to type all this out for the demo, but it's just a pure component that will show a card of each of the developers. All right, so we're looping through that, but we haven't provided this homepage any data yet. So we're using next, and we can make this a static page if we just export get static props. So let's do that. Get static props, and it has a context, and we're going to type that. Get static props context. And then we want to grab the Apollo client. So we can do that with a framework method called get Apollo client, and we just pass in the context. That will, when we pass in the context, it'll store the cache of that query on the context, so we don't end up making the call multiple times. The framework handles all of that for us. And then we want to make the query. So we're going to grab the data from client.query. We need to await this because it returns a promise. And we'll pass in get all devs. All right, great. Now we have our data. We need to return that. So we're going to return props, which is going to have developers. And it'll be data.developers.nodes. And the reason for that is right here. So it's going to come back as developers.nodes. So that's why we're passing that in the way that we are. We also want to pass in revalidate one here so that we constantly get new data as we add those developers to our Headless WordPress site. And there's one other thing I want to do here, which is make a framework call to get next static props. And I just pass in the context. This is the final thing that I need to do to make sure that I cache that query. And I'm going to import that from the framework. From our next section of the framework. All right. So now what we're doing is we're grabbing the client, which has been put onto our application by the framework. If we look in this app here, we have a headless provider, and this does all the magic of making sure that Apollo is set up and ready for us to go. We make the query to get all devs. We call this framework method just to save the cache from Apollo onto the client, onto the context. And then we return our props, pass that into our home, and just show these cards. So let's see if it's working. We'll refresh this, and there they are. We have our developers coming out of Headless WordPress. So let's go create another one just to show how this is working. We can come in here, add a new one. Let's say Dan Abramov. Pretty sure this is just Dan Abramov. Might not be. He works at Facebook, and he knows React, I'd say, and those things. We'll publish that. Go back over here, refresh. I have to refresh twice, or not this time. And there's Dan. All right, cool. It was not the right handle. Now that we have our site up and running, the next step that we would want to do is to actually deploy this and make it live. So I'm excited to show off a little bit about what I've been working on at WP Engine, which is the Atlas platform, where you can deploy your WordPress site and your Node front end, no matter what you've written it in. So in this case, we're using Next, but we could use Gatsby or Vue or Angular or whatever, and we can deploy it to Atlas. So let's go ahead and do that. If I come over to my WP Engine portal, I have this site already running. So I have a WordPress site, and now I just want to deploy my app. So I go to Atlas, then I'm going to create a new app, and I'm just going to name the app Follow a Dev, and we're going to use our headless environment name is going to be production. We don't need anything else, right? And then we want Follow a Dev is our WordPress environment. We're going to run this in US Central. In our GitHub settings, this is running at matt-lander/follow a dev, and it's on the main branch. Then we need to give it that environment variable that we created earlier, right here. And we need to give it the URL to our site, which I've got this already running out here, so I just need to grab this URL. I've got more developers already set up. We'll save that. We'll click Create App. It'll go out, pull our code from GitHub, download it, npm install, run a build script, npm run wpe-build is the script that it runs. And once it does that, it will run next build, which will create all of our static pages, and then deploy it where it'll run npm start, where we spin that up on port 8080, and then the platform knows how to run it. So once it's up and running, it'll be good to go. And we'll see that that is over here building. And when it's done, we'll come back and it'll be running. All right, so our site is up and running. We've given it a URL. I also attached a custom domain to it, and now we can go out and check it out. So it's actually on Follow a Dev. And you saw how fast that is. It's just running, it's instant, it's running static. And we also added some more functionality in here. You can check it out in the code, but we can filter by different keywords here or different languages. And it's super fast and quick. So check that out. Check out the code, check out Atlas, and let me know what you think. All right, before we're done, I have one more thing that I want to show you. So at WP Engine, we've been working to make Headless WordPress a really great headless CMS. And part of that is improving the user experience. You probably noticed that while we were creating those custom content types, that it didn't feel very headless first, because there were a lot of fields in there that just didn't make sense. So we've been working through our open source framework, which is out here. Make sure you start it so you can follow along on some code to create a content modeler, which I'm demoing right now. So it's the first time anyone has seen this, but it allows you to create content models in a much more user-friendly way. So we could create that same content model, so developers, that we created earlier in this much better user experience. We have different fields that we can create, so we can put in our name as a text field. We could add another field for like the languages, which is a repeater. So that's like an array. And we can create these fields and we can create this content type in this very simple way. And then we can also have a different experience for our editors, which will be coming out soon. So you can't get this yet, but make sure you follow along with our project so that you know when it is available. All right, and finally, if you want to keep track of the things that I'm doing and my team is doing around Headless WordPress, go to developers.wpengine.com. You can join our Slack channel where we have lots of people in there that are talking about Headless WordPress and doing different projects around it. Also, we create a lot of content on a weekly basis. So we have Headless WordPress Live, where we do live coding on YouTube every Friday at 1 p.m. Central. Check that out. We actually built this Follow Dev site during one of our live coding sessions. And then we also have the Decode podcast. So come and check that out. It's out on iTunes, Spotify, all over, but we just talk about everything front-end development and some things around Headless WordPress as well. So check it out. Let me know what you think and go build some cool things with Headless WordPress. And happy coding.